Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's 2021 Virtual Behavioral Health Forum session. My name is Kevin McCall, and I am the supervisor of the McLean County Triage Center. Today, I'll be standing in for the Behavioral Health Coordinating Council supervisor who could not be with us today. To start, I'd like to talk for a second about the forum itself. The McLean County Community Behavioral Health Forum is typically a one-day event consisting of multiple breakout sessions. With the ongoing global pandemic, we have adapted our in-person format, and this is now our second year holding the forum virtually. We have been pleased to offer a wide variety of individual sessions related to behavioral health, and today will conclude the Behavioral Health Forum as this is our final scheduled session, so a special thank you to those who have joined us today. I will provide links for both our website and our YouTube page in the chat located on your sidebar so that you can view all presentations from this year and last. The idea of free community education, the highlighting of available community resources, and the sharing of ideas through the Behavioral Health Forum originated out of the Mental Health Action Plan, which was adopted by the 2015 McLean County Board. This plan originated out of more than 100 community members that identified needs and best practices related to behavioral health specific to McLean County. In these uncertain and difficult times, we believe that it is more important than ever to help provide education, resources, encouragement, and even simply recognition of life's challenges. During today's presentation, there will be time at the end for questions. We ask that if you choose to ask a question during the presentation, that you provide enough context so that questions can be appropriately answered by our speaker at the end. Today's speaker is Abby Lyons. Abby Lyons is a social and emotional learning coach in Central Illinois and the CEO of Community Wellness Lab, LLC, leading a team of experts whose mission it is to care for the well-being. Sorry, I have a camera problem here. Whoops. Abby uses a mindful approach to support districts and schools with the refinement and creation of systems and structures built on the foundations of brain-based teaching and learning. Additionally, Abby is the owner of Yolk Lab in Bloomington, Illinois, a community yoga studio and craft coffee shop. In all of these ventures, Abby aims to create an experience with the highest integrity to allow learners the space and freedom to discover what is possible in their work and lives. So without further ado, Abby, you have the floor. Sorry, I kind of jumbled over your introduction there a bit, but thank you for being with us today. I'll let you go ahead and get started.
Thanks so much, Kevin. No worries at all. Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's good to be with all of you today. I say this every time I have to present and not see people, but this is not my preferred way of presenting. I like to see people's faces. So I wish I could see you, but I'm glad that you're here. I'd like to start us off by supporting our regulation with 3 deep breaths. So if you would join me in putting both of your feet on the floor and your spine in a line, just meaning reaching the top of your head up towards the ceiling, and you can soften your shoulders down your back. And you can close your eyes if you want, or you can pick a spot on the floor or the table or the wall in front of you to fix your eyes. And then go ahead and take a deep breath in through your nose. And open your mouth, exhale to let it go. Breathe in, fill all the way up. And exhale to let it go. And one more deep breath in. And send it out, exhale. And you can open your eyes if they are closed. And come back into the space. And Kevin, I think, are people able to type in the chat?
Yeah, you could chat into, you could definitely put something into the chat box down there at the bottom if you're looking at the sidebar.
Okay. All right, so I would like for you to put your 2-word check-in in the chat. A 2-word check-in is just 2 words about how you feel in this moment. So for example, I feel grateful and busy. Would you all be willing to type 2 words about how you feel in this moment in the chat? I'll wait just a moment to give you the space and time to think about how you feel and then to type that into the chat box.
Yeah, I don't know if we're just not getting some presentation here. I put in my words though, Abby. I don't know if that helps you at all.
Thanks, Kevin. Tired and optimistic. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Well, even if you're not able to put it in the chat, I would highly recommend that you take a moment to just check in on yourself, see how you're doing today. Whatever words come up with that are always allowed to be there without judgment or attachment. It's just an opportunity to notice how you are, where you're at today. So I'd like to take a moment to explain a little bit about how I ended up here, maybe to provide some more context. I know Kevin read my bio, but there's usually a lot more to say than is allowed for on a bio at the beginning of a presentation. So I am formerly a classroom teacher, so I taught first grade and then transitioned into a role within Unit 5 school district as a social emotional learning coach and interventionist. And in the transition of that role, my work shifted from academic and social emotional well-being of students to pretty much solely social emotional well-being of students and of adults. I did that for a year and then transitioned out of that role into a role with the Regional Office of Education as a social emotional learning instructional coach, working across the region supporting school districts with social emotional learning. And then just recently transitioned out of that ROE position into the ownership of my own consulting business, working on systems and structures around social and emotional well-being with districts all across the state. And in tandem with that, I also opened this yoga studio called Yolk Lab here in Bloomington. We're on South Prospect Road, 207 South Prospect Road. Most people know us, the location of us. We're right behind the Windjammer. So in shifting into this role of owning a space, a business, a brick and mortar business in this community, I have gone on my own journey around mental health and self-care. The work, as you can imagine, is very busy, just like it is for every single person. And my understanding of self-care has really shifted a lot in the past few years. Self-care is becoming a much more prominent conversation broadly, even prior to the pandemic, but especially now because of the pandemic, we're all on this journey trying to figure out what does it actually look like to take care of ourselves, and to do that within the constraints of not being allowed to gather the way that we might like to, or not being able to do some of the activities we would have previously done that would support our self-care and well-being. And it's been a difficult thing for many people to do. And today I want to provide a framework for us to think through self-care that might be different than other ways you've heard self-care talked about before. There tends to be a perception that self-care is something that we do that's separate from our day-to-day life, like going and getting a massage or going out for a date night or getting a pedicure or watching a sports game or any number of other things that you might do in addition to your normal responsibilities, like going to work or caring for family members or friends or whatever else you happen to do in your life. And the way that I want to reframe self-care in this conversation is that self-care is something that you can do always, that it's not limited to after work or the weekends or when you're less busy, that it's something that actually can become a way of being and is not just something in addition to the way that you're living your life. So with that, I'm going to share my screen here. Can you see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
You can?
Yep.
Okay, you can see it says pattern of stress.
Yep, sure can.
Excellent. Okay, great. So this graphic here comes from the work of Dr. Bruce Perry. Dr. Perry just recently wrote a book with Oprah called What Happened to You? I actually have it right here. I'll hold it up so you can see it. Can you see my face even though my screen's shared, Kevin?
Yeah, I can still see your face. I have that same book too.
Good deal. Yeah, it's an awesome book. I've read it and listened to it and read it again. Really great book. I would highly recommend checking it out. But Dr. Perry's work has been exploding recently as a result of this conversation with the pandemic about how to take care of ourselves and take care of others, especially in the face of trauma experiences. So I'm trained in Dr. Perry's neurosequential model, Neurosequential just means that our brain works in a specific order from bottom to top. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but this graphic is a graphic that I use in speaking with educators often, speaking with caregivers, and just the general public. It's a very useful graphic to help frame up the impact of stress. And we often talk about stress like it's a bad thing, right? We say, I'm so stressed, this is so stressful. But stress in and of itself is actually not inherently bad. Stress, when it manifests in a predictable, moderate, and controllable way, we actually become more tolerant and resilient to stress. I'll use some examples in a moment, but oppositely, when we experience a pattern of stress that is unpredictable, extreme, and prolonged, we become sensitized and vulnerable to stress. This is important to understand when we think about self-care because it helps us understand how stress actually impacts our brains and our bodies. And so then it helps us find a point of entry to know what would make the most sense in terms of taking care of myself given the various states that I might be in. So to break it down a little bit more, predictable, moderate, and controllable stress is like, we could think about it in the context of exercise. If I'm training for a half marathon, for example, 13.1 miles, it doesn't make sense for me if I haven't been running to go out and run 13 miles over 6 weeks, and every day for 6 weeks. That's too much for my body to handle. That's unpredictable for my body. What my body predicts is that I might go on walks or maybe a 1 mile or 2 mile run, but my body's not able to know that I'm going on a 13-mile run every single day. It's also extreme. It's so far outside of the context of what I do right now that my body would be shocked if I went out to try to run 13 miles. And when it happens over time, say a 6-week period, right? One 13-mile run isn't going to do much damage. Doing that over time is going to cause a lot of issues for me. Injuries, probably shin splints, hip issues. And then my body would be more sensitized to running. It would be harder for me to run if I was running in that way over time. Oppositely, if I started training for a half marathon by running 1 mile every day for a week and then running 2 miles the next week and 3 miles the week after that and building in a way that was more predictable for my body, more moderate, more scaffolded compared to where I am right now, and more controllable for my body in terms of the amount of time that it's happening, my body would actually build the tolerance and resilience to running and I would become a stronger runner. Our brains work exactly the same way. So when we experience patterns of stress that are predictable, there's structure, there's certainty, there's control, we become more adept at facing and experiencing and navigating stress. A good example of how this is not happening is this pandemic. We don't know what to expect. We haven't known what to expect for almost 2 years at this point around this pandemic. Do we have to wear masks? Do we not have to wear masks? Is the vaccine good? Is the vaccine bad? Will schools be open? Will schools be closed? Will my kid go to school today or will they have to learn remotely? There's been all of this confusion and unpredictability because of this pandemic. The life of living in a pandemic is so far from the experience that we were having as humans prior to the pandemic. It's extreme. And now it's been going on for almost 2 years, which is certainly a prolonged amount of time, meaning that every single person is sensitized to stress. We're vulnerable. It's harder for us to handle stress. There's injury, there's a wound there because of this experience. And so what does that mean, look like? How do we understand that in the context of self-care? Well, one of the things we can understand from this graphic is that our brain likes predictability and it likes control. And so if we can find routines for ourselves that are predictable and controllable, that will start to offset the unpredictability and the extreme nature of what many of us are facing right now through this pandemic, or even just through normal life things, chaos, confusion, divorce, death. There's lots of things that happen throughout people's lives that are unpredictable, extreme, and prolonged. This pandemic is just a communal experience of a pattern of stress that is sensitizing. But everyone at some point in their life is experiencing a pattern of stress that is sensitizing. And so what we can look for is opportunities to take care of ourselves in ways that are predictable and controllable. So that oftentimes looks like setting structured routines for ourselves, waking up at the same time every day, going to bed at the same time every day, exercising consistently, eating food consistently, lots of protein, lots of carbs, lots of healthy fats. There's lots of ways that we can create a level of predictability in our lives that isn't subject to whether we're in a pandemic or not. Meditation obviously is a great way to calm your mind, to create a sense of predictability for yourself, a sense of control. Yoga, as a yoga studio owner, that's something I've been relying heavily on lately. There's lots of ways that you can increase predictability, but in the conversation of self-care, we tend to focus on the activity itself, not the way that the activity is included in our lives. And so yes, yoga is great. Yes, meditation is great. Yes, eating healthy is great. But if I'm doing that in a sporadic or unpredictable way, I'm not actually reducing the amount of stress or increasing my chance of being more tolerant. I'm maybe even adding more unpredictability to my life. And so we can think about, I think generally people know what's healthy for them, right? I mean, I think we generally know eating healthy is good for us, exercising is good for us, but we don't often understand how to integrate that into our lives in a way that is predictable, moderate, and controllable. And so thinking about routines, thinking about relational engagement, who we can have support us and hold us accountable, that should all be a conversation when we think about self-care, not just the activity itself. Let me move on to the next slide here. So this is what I was referencing earlier as the bottom to top or the neurosequential way that our brain works. This is going to be important when we think about self-care to understand how the order we can set ourselves up in to be more regulated. So we know that our brains work from bottom to top. This means that every single piece of information that comes into our brain has to go through the bottom part of our brain first, the brainstem, the regulatory networks. So we have to be regulated in order to relate, in order to reason. One very good example of this is how we started the session today. We took 3 deep breaths to support your regulation. I asked you to engage via the chat to support relationship. That's hard to do when I can't see your faces, but generally when I do this work, I'm able to see people's faces. But we were related in thinking about how we were. I was going to use that information to help me understand how you were so I could frame the session around that. And then I went into talking about brain science and self-care. And so we can actually be really strategic about how we set up our days or set up chunks of our days in a way that follows this sequence of engagement. Because at the end of the day, what we want to be able to do, why self-care matters so much, is because we want to be able to participate in our lives through a space of reason, right? We don't want to be reactive. We want to be reasonable. We want to be able to see the entire situation, to understand it, to reflect on it, to process it, and then to make, healthy decisions to move forward. But you can't do that unless you're regulated and related. So let's think about just a general day, for example. I'm very general, right? I'm making a lot of assumptions, not knowing who any of you are, but let's say you wake up and your day consists of you taking kids to school, eating breakfast, and going to work. How could we set that day up in a day that is supported by this sequence of engagement, regulate, relate, reason? Waking up, drinking a glass of water, taking 3 deep breaths would support your regulation. Then, as you sit down to eat breakfast, if you have that space and time, and even if you don't, as you're maybe grabbing a Pop-Tart on the way out with your kid, like looking at your kid and saying, like, I'm so glad to see you this morning. I missed you while we were sleeping. I hope you have a great day. That small amount of connection for both you and your child supports relationship. And then moving on with your day, to reason through any problems that might be happening at school with your child, or to support any problems that might be happening with you at work. You're in a much better space when you take small moments throughout your day to regulate and relate so that you can reason. And when we think about self-care, right, it's not a checklist, and it's not going to be the same every day, and it's not going to be the same in every season of your life. There are moments of ebb and flow when it comes to self-care. But if you have a lens that helps you understand that I need to set my day up in a way that is predictable and controllable, and that I can actually set my day up to support my regulation, my relationship, and my reasoning, your brain and your body are going to be in a much healthier state than if we're constantly kind of forcing ourselves into the reasoning and we forget to regulate and relate in a predictable, moderate, and controllable way. So with that, I'd like for you to consider for a moment, maybe even write down, what activities in your day help you regulate, relate, and reason? So what are you doing throughout your day that supports your regulation, your relationship, and your reasoning? Take a moment, maybe grab a Post-it note or your phone, take out your notes. I'll give you some examples as you're working through that from my own life. So yoga obviously is a way that I regulate. Regulatory activities are activities that have a rhythm to them. Walking is a very regulating activity for people because there's a 1, 2, 1, 2, foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. There's a rhythm to that. Yoga is the same way, right? There's an inhale and there's an exhale. There's an inhale and then there's an exhale. There's a rhythm to that that is very regulating. So yoga, walking, music is a way that I regulate. When I'm working on my computer, I always have music on in the background. Again, that rhythm is very soothing for our brains and for our bodies. Relationally, I work hard to connect with people who walk into the studio. I try to make time at the end of the day to connect with my partner, eating dinner with him, spending time with him. And then the reasoning part of my day is easy, right? That's an easy one. Like, so much of our life requires our ability to think and problem solve and make decisions. So the areas that we really need to focus on when it comes to self-care is the regulation and the relationship. And in a pandemic, both of those things are hard. I mean, there's a pretty consistent communal dysregulation happening right now, especially in my world in schools. People are tired. People are overburdened, people are sensitized, and so their reactions are causing a communal dysregulation. And really taking the time to see that and understand that is really a useful thing, so that we can come from a space of empathy rather than a space of reaction. I would invite you, if you live with people, work with people, to take this conversation back into your spaces. Because at the end of the day, we can set up systems that support these things. Like in schools, I talk to teachers a lot about starting their classroom experience from this angle, taking 3 deep breaths with their students, doing a 2-word check-in, and then moving into whatever activities they have planned for that day, rather than jumping right into the content, the science lesson, the math lesson, etc. I wanted to talk just a little bit about the Yolk Lab, which is the yoga studio that we have here in Bloomington, as an example of well-being and self-care, and an example of regulate, relate, reason. So the yoga studio, the Yoga Lab, our mission is to free people to do the work that they love. And really what that is I hope that in each and every interaction that someone has in this space, they're seen, they're heard, they're more regulated, and they're able to go back out into the world and do whatever it is that they do really well, more empowered, more powerfully. And the way that we do that is actually by setting our physical space up in a way that follows regulate, relate, and reason. So when you first walk into our space, you'll see the yoga studio, regulate, right? That's a regulating activity. Then you'll see the coffee shop. We've decided that most people, not all people, but most people really love coffee, and it's an easy way to invite people into relationship. And so you have your yoga class that you take, and then after yoga, you can have a cup of coffee, you can relate, regulate, relate. And then in the back of our space, we have a conference space, a lab space, we call it. That is an opportunity to offer people workshops, learning sessions, a space for meetings, etc. That's the reasoning side of what we do. So literally, as someone moves through the physical environment of our space, they're following the trajectory of regulate, relate, and reason. And I say that because that in and of itself is a conversation about intentionally living well, right? It's like we intentionally created an environment that moves people through that brain-based approach so that they can be more free to do the work that they love. And that took just a little bit of intentionality, right? We could have put the yoga studio in the back, but we chose to put it in the front because we knew that regulation needed to happen before relationship or reasoning. And, you know, there are so many choices to make in a day about what you eat, who you're with, what you do. And when we think about that, our choices can be really intentional, coming from a lens of how is this taking care of me, right? That could be the filter question, like how is this activity or this conversation promoting or contributing to my well-being? And if the answer is it's not, then the conversation with ourselves needs to be, okay, what would this look like if it was contributing to my well-being? How would that interaction with my spouse or my child or my colleague look like if it was contributing to my well-being? And then outside of that is a level of awareness of community well-being and community care. That is, how is this contributing to the well-being of my community? And when we think about self-care, really, that's the goal, right? Is to take care of ourselves so that we can show up and be seen. And then we can take care of other people, and then other people can take care of us. And then it's a reciprocal relationship. And it's not something that we do in isolation, but something that we do as a community, as a culture, because we've decided together that our well-being is the highest priority. And then all of our choices reflect that. So my encouragement to you would be to take a look at your choices, how you're spending your time, and to not think about self-care as an add-on to those things, but as actually the thing. How are these things in my life taking care of me? And if they're not, are there opportunities for me to shift my perspective on them, to shift the activity around them, to ask for support, to set a boundary maybe, so that self-care doesn't become an add-on to your life, but it becomes the way that you live your life, that you're just taking care of yourself, right? Self-care is not a novel concept. It's like you're taking care of yourself. That's something that should be a basic experience for every single person. But we've really lost sight of that. There's been a lot of, layers of trauma on top of us from this pandemic and from our life experiences that make it hard sometimes to see our way through that. But I think that question of how is this contributing to my well-being is a very useful question to be able to filter for ourselves a little bit better about what it is that actually makes us feel good, makes us feel supported, regulated, and related in our world. Kevin, do we have an opportunity for questions?
We do. We could go ahead and open it up to any questions that we have so far, if anyone has questions up to this point. Oh, hold on one second here.
Or thoughts too, Kevin.
Oh, it looks like we had some of the 2-word check-ins come in from before. That kind of scrolled to the top. So I'll just share what those words were, at least, even though I know that was a while ago. We had exhausted and jittery, and then we also had relaxed and excited.
Great, thank you.
And then someone here, if you can hear me, said you can't type in the chat. What you did type in is good enough. So I think people are just answering in the question section as opposed to the chat, and that's fine. I can read those back.
Got it, okay. Yeah, I can't see any of that on my end, so.
No, it doesn't look like we have any further questions, but I'll let people know that they can go ahead and interject, and I'll try and do those a little bit differently, maybe if people have questions as we go, since I know you like to do a little bit more engagement with people, and it's kind of difficult in this format. If people do have questions as we go, I'm happy to ask them.
Yeah, I'm ready for questions and conversation now. I've done my spiel. So if we have any questions, we can wait a couple minutes. Questions, thoughts, conversation starters. If anyone wants to dig into any of that further, we can go there now.
Really just having more comments than questions. Someone said, I love Dr. Perry, and thank you for relating this to his work. I haven't finished that book yet, but I'll show you just as proof here. I'll pop back on the camera real quick. Come on. All right, I have the book too right here. And so we've been reading this in the Triage Center. It's not coming through with my awesome fake background, but this has been a really great book so far, and it's been recommended by a lot of people. Yeah, the background is fake. It doesn't look this nice out in McLean County right now. Well, it looks okay,
It does
but
kind of look similar.
yeah, not too bad.
It looks
And
warmer there.
my office is also on the ground floor, so
Oh,
not quite the Willy Wonka view that we have here.
yeah.
Okay, so right now I'm gonna go ahead and also link into the chat. Got to pull it up real quick. Our website link and additionally our YouTube page, as well as my contact information. If anybody has questions after the fact, I know that it can be a little bit intimidating to sometimes ask questions, especially when you can't see all of the other people. And if you have questions for me, if you're viewing this on YouTube, you can ask questions at that email that I'll provide here as soon as I can figure out where I put the chat at. Here we go. Okay, so there are both of those links for you.
Great.
We also got a thank you for including the flyers about mental health first aid. So if you haven't seen that, there are 5 handouts that are attached to this presentation. One of those is for mental health first aid. There's also a brochure for PATH on there, and we've been including those with every presentation. So yes, thank you for saying thanks about those. We're happy to include those this year. I don't see any other questions coming up right now. So does that conclude your presentation for today?
Yeah. Yeah, and
Okay.
should I drop my email into the
Yeah,
chat
go ahead
too,
and
just
put
in
that
case?
in the chat too. Yeah. So I have a question, I guess specifically. I have a new, not new anymore, but it still feels new to me, a niece that's around 2 years old now. And when we talk about intentionally living well, I'm not a parent, so I don't know those things, or I don't have that engagement like in the example that you said in the morning. Touching base with your child in the morning when you're grabbing a Pop-Tart, going out the door. What are things that I could do to kind of incorporate that same mindset in my interactions with my niece or maybe just with other family members that I don't directly live with?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, the first piece of that conversation is supporting your own regulation because emotions are contagious. So your own emotions and your own well-being and regulation can actually dramatically impact friends, family, coworkers, children, especially kids. They're very attuned, right, to adult dysregulation. So your own heart rate, your own blood pressure, your own breathing, all of those things are really important when you're around young people, because they'll start to link up with your breath. So if you have fast-paced breathing when you are with your niece because you're stressed because you don't know what to do or how to interact or whatever, that transfers to her experience. And so your own sense of regulation is really important to support her whenever you're around her, but also your body language and facial expression. So one thing that I've learned from Dr. Perry is that 97% of what is interpreted in an interaction comes from your body language and your facial expressions. Only 3% of your words are actually the things that the other person's brain interprets. And so your level to her, right? Crouching down, getting on the floor, so that you're at the same eye level as her, having an open posture rather than a closed posture, you're pacing and speaking slowly. All of those things are really important to support her well-being and regulation.
Okay, awesome. We did have a more specific question about the classes that Yoga Lab actually offers. We had an inquiry about that.
Sure, yeah. So we have 26 classes a week. We have classes every day at the studio. During the weekdays, mornings, early mornings, 6 a.m., 7:30 a.m. We have a lunchtime class, a 9 a.m. class, and then evening classes. And the style of yoga that we teach is power yoga, which usually isn't intimidating to people, but actually refers to the power of you just showing up on your yoga mat. So our classes are accessible to anyone. We have had people come in there and lay on their yoga mat for the entire 60 minutes. We've had people stand on their heads. So we're accessible to any and all people who might be interested in checking us out. So Our website is theyogalab.org. So you can find more about us there. We're also on Instagram at theyogalab.bn. And you can email me with any questions too about that.
Yeah, and you have Abby's contact information in the chat.
Yeah.
All right, so that looks like it for our questions today. I want to thank everyone for participating in our final forum session of this year, and a special thanks to Abby for presenting for us again. As always, a great presentation, Abby, and thank you for working with us to deliver this one again. We really appreciate it. Everybody have a great day and try and stay warm. Have a great Thanksgiving coming up next week, and we hope to see you at next year's forum. Have a great day.
Thanks, Kevin.
Bye.